At every active shooter event, there's a minimum of 3 crime scenes. And where the shooting happened is a big one, but it's not the only one. And the others can get really complicated. That's today's topic. Stick around. Welcome to the Active Shooter Incident Management Podcast. My name is Bill Godfrey, your podcast host. I am joined by 3 of my fellow instructors here at the National Center for Integrated Emergency Response. On my left, Kobe Breen. Good to have you back, Kobe.
Thanks, Bill. Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
We got Adam Penley in the house. Adam, good to see you.
Good. And nice to see you.
And Wanatan, back again. It's good to see you, brother.
Same here, brother.
All right. So today's topic is the minimum three crime scenes of an active shooter event. Obviously, where the shooting occurred is one of them. Mm-hmm. What are the other 2, Adam?
Well, at a minimum, we need to think about, pretty early on, we need to think about how did the suspect get there? What was their mode of transportation? Because that vehicle is going to be something that has to be secured. And it's very likely that it's somewhere in the parking lot, and our fire EMS folks might have pulled right up next to it. So we need to identify that pretty quickly just to make sure that there's not an additional threat in the vehicle. And then obviously, this suspect came from somewhere. They have a residence or they live somewhere. And that's also a really important thing to track down pretty quickly, because in a lot of different stories, the active shooter maybe had done something to their family or to a family member at that house prior to going to another location, or that there's a threat there as well that has to be tracked down.
Yeah, we've seen that. It's not been super high frequent, but at the shooter's home or residence, wherever they're, sometimes even, they're living with mom and dad. Yeah, right. There's certainly evidence, but also in some cases, IEDs, bomb making materials. You got a little experience on that side of the house, Kobe. How big a deal is that when you're the follow-on responder going to check the residence?
It could be no big deal, or it could be the worst deal that you've dealt with if you don't plan for it, or other than just ripping the door open and going right in. Let's evaluate. Let's look at what could we possibly see. So what we've seen in the past in some instances is it's set up as an area denial system. So the attacker had set the residence up to be examined by, they know responders are going to come there. So that's the wave to attack the follow-on responders. Instead of at the scene, waiting for them to get to the residence where it may be their guards let down a little bit. They think they're just going to go in and examine the forensics, the computer forensics or the physical forensics around the house. But maybe it's set up to injure them and then in turn eradicate that evidence. So it could be set up that way. So just keep your head on a swivel still, even though there's no known physical danger there as far as a person, could very well be set up as an area denial or evidence eradication event. Yeah.
So Adam, when you develop the intel to figure out where the shooter's residence is that a SWAT team deployment? Is that a SWAT team function to go do that? How does that unfold? What does it look like? Who's going to manage it? How does it relate to the primary incident?
Again, pretty early on that it's something that's going to have to be checked. And I think, so when we initially respond, as we train around the country to respond to the crisis site itself, that's where the bulk of our training is. So it's very easy for those early supervisors in command to focus entirely on the crisis site. And it's going to take that up and out thinking for somebody to stop and say, hey, wait a minute, how did he get here and where does he live? And try to develop that intelligence, like you said, try to get that information fairly quickly. But then you have to ask yourself, if you're the incident command at the crisis site, do you have the capacity to also now manage something that is very likely to be a good distance away? Mm-hmm. If you're,
in fact, it might even be in somebody else's jurisdiction, right?
Absolutely, right. So that's the first thing. So let's say, if you're a college campus environment and you're all one jurisdiction and the dorm is very close by and very manageable with the same set of resources, you may be able to manage it yourself. But that's not likely the case. It's very likely that they've come from somewhere else, and then in many areas of the country, jurisdictions are so chopped up in a county or even within a state that not only could it be in another municipality, it could be in another county, it could be in another state. So how do you manage that? Having the jurisdictional authority over that second location is another thing that you have to ask yourself. So very quickly, you're going to probably realize that you don't have either the capacity or the authority to be the one in charge of the residence or the other location.
It's an interesting question. It also makes me wonder, though, state to state, aren't there very different rules of engagement on making entry to the house based on having a search warrant, not having a search warrant, exigent circumstances? Doesn't that vary from state to state?
Oh, certainly. And then it could even involve, are you going to interject your federal assets? Are they going to support you in any way? And then they have their own set of guidelines, SOPs, rules of engagements, or general orders, GOs, how to deal with that, and what do they need to get signed off by judges to go in, and if they have to have a warrant to go in there, and what are times that they can go in and do this, because sometimes there's certain business hours that are set up for that team to be, or that judge, that district to be able to respond to it. And then, but yes, cities, talking to cities is different. Then you incorporate states talking to different states, and then you have everybody that's going to be just separated by their own property boundaries of who's going to be able to do what, and do they want to cooperate with each other and actually help, or I'm not saying that they're going to be intentional failure to act. I'm not going to help that state. It's just the getting the right people talking at the right time of the day to get it done the fastest way.
And it may be more urgent than just an investigation. And in fact, it might even be your fire EMS guys that like at I like when you're at a crash scene, and oftentimes the officers get focused on the car that's really crushed up bad. The police do. And then it'll often be a fire EMS guy that says, hey, where's the other vehicle? Right? Because they want to make sure that person's okay too. So in the command post, the fire EMS folks might say, hey, where did he come from? Did he hurt anybody else? Right? So they might be even the ones that are prompting to want to go see where the residents.
What's that? I think the other route. Yeah. What was their route? Yeah.
The other challenge that comes up on the fire and EMS side is, we get called to a hazard. Unknown hazard. Maybe it's a hazardous materials. Maybe it's an IED. Maybe it's a little bit of both. We don't really know. Our first reaction is to roll in and take command, and we're in charge. Only this is an arm of a very significant active law enforcement event. Right. What kind of conversations is that going to generate at the command post, Juan?
Oh, very, very exciting conversations and being there also. But yeah, we have to realize, the fire EMS side, that this is a law enforcement event. This is their scene. We're as an asset to them to assist them in this scene, seeing that it was a hazmat scene. We're going to help them. Hey, what do you need from us to take care of it, and not go and start doing an arm wrestling match that I got command or you got command. This is a law enforcement. What we have to realize that this is a law enforcement event. It is not a fire event. This is a law enforcement event. They still have command. We're there to assist them in helping mitigate the situation.
And this runs us. So we've talked a little bit about hitting their house, but I'm going to take us on a slightly different tangent that has similar interesting challenges as well. So when we look at the data, and we just talked about this recently on another podcast, looking at the data, the number of suicides is on the decline, and the number of people fleeing the scene is on the rise. Right. So now you've got a manhunt. And in some cases, it may be, the guy's in the woods, whatever, not actively engaged. Right. But in some cases, they're fleeing, and they're causing more injuries and destruction in multiple locations. It's like this string. It's a string of attacks, a string of crime scenes that fire EMS has to be engaged on, law enforcement has to be engaged on. And God help us if the guy drives through 3 different jurisdictions. How do we get our arms around all that?
So obviously the first thing that comes to mind is it's going to be resource intensive. We know we have all trained so much to respond to active shooter events that it's very likely there's going to be a large convergence of resources from multiple jurisdictions to that first event. And that's what I try to, when I talk about this with other responders, I say, you need to, that's the language, not the site or the event or the active shooter scene. It's you're responding to the first event, because we are seeing increases where there could very well be an intentional coordinated attack where there's going to be a second location, or just the guy's on a spree, right? He's going to go from one location to the next. So again, it comes back to some resource management where you need to think about, are we over converging on scene number one, right? Because at a minimum, we know we're going to have potentially a vehicle to deal with that they arrived in, and we're going to have the location where they live. Hospitals are going to be a scene. So the initial shooting site is just scene number one. Now, add additional jurisdictions to that, add additional tactical decisions that have to be made, like a manhunt or surrounding a house or the investigative side of it. You now have resources in multiple locations, and the tool in the toolbox for that is potentially an area command. The idea of an area command is not to take over the individual decisions that are being made at these multiple scenes, but to say, hey, we're going to coordinate up here at this extra level to say, we only have so many bomb squads, we only have so many available law enforcement officers, we only have so many available engines and rescue units. Which scene needs them the most and which needs them first, right? So they start making some critical resource decisions to manage these multiple scenes. And it all comes back to the same thing as the original scene. It's all about time, managing the clock, getting ahead of it. So, so the suspect can't keep surprising you at every new scene. You want to get ahead of it. You want to start building some responses that think about, hey, we're going to put a package together. So the next suspicious call we get, we have a package to send to it. Yeah. That can all happen at more of an area command level.
Yeah. And thing with the area command that we have to be aware of, that as an area commander, we're not running scene number one, scene number two, or scene number three. Those individual incident commanders are running those scenes. Me as an area commander, as an example, I'll contact Adam on scene one. Give me an command part. What are you doing? Yeah. What do you got? And what are your needs? Mm-hmm. And we'll go from there. Same thing with scene number two. Mm-hmm. What do you got? What are your needs? Yeah. And scene number three. And then being, that resource dependent, let's say we're talking about multi-jurisdictional, hey, you probably might have an emergency manager there next to you that knows the ropes and goes, hey, can you get resources, X amount of resources for scene number two or scene number three? And that way we could start coordinating those massive resources that each individual incident needs. So that's one of the things when we talk about area command is not, hey, I'm not running these three scenes. You are capable of running those three scenes. I'm here to divvy you up the resources that you need. And sometimes, hey, are you done with your resources on scene number two that I could give to scene number two or three? And we could work those, coordinate that way.
Yeah, certainly.
We've had a number. It's not a huge number, but it has happened with enough frequency to make you pay attention to it. Adam, you used the phrase spree, where you've got a mobile attacker that's leaving behind them a wake of damage, multiple sites, 3, 4, 5, 6 different sites that they've hit. And what we've typically seen is there's only one or two. It's a onesie, twosie, then move to the next site, onesie, twosie, kind of the next site. But it creates this chaos in the dispatch center for law enforcement, for fire EMS. What are some of the challenges, Kobe, when you're watching that kind of a fast-moving attack to figure out what's going on?
Yeah, it's the trying to attack the unknown. What are we looking at? I've said before is we plan for the worst and hope for the best. And this is obviously a worse if they haven't been able to stop them at one location and they've moved from, instead of 1 to 2, that's ideal. Before we get them to 2, they've gone to 3 and 4. It's what they've caused there and what are the likely rabbit holes, so to say, that LE is going to be responding down of. Is it always going to come in as that's the right suspect description when they see people fleeing? So that we could be chasing 4 or 5, 6 different suspect vehicles of looking for this second, third, fourth person when it's actually the same one, or they're confusing responders with the suspect. So it's just the fear of the unknown and somebody trying to eventually piece it together. Like what are we actually looking for, and what are where are they going? What is their intent? Is there any pattern to that? And again, that's probably going to become at some point in area command, incident command, that's going to start putting this together. Is what are we looking at? Is this a truly planned event, or are they just simply running and it's just a random locations that they're hitting along the way?
And I think one of the things that we in law enforcement do well, let's say that same spree suspect, Bonnie and Clyde are going from bank to bank to bank. We are actually pretty good about probably communicating their description and their last known direction of travel, and some jurisdictions can get ahead of that, right? And they might be able to figure out, and capture them before they rob yet another bank, right? Mm-hmm. They're on a spree. But when active shooter type events happen, sometimes again we get bogged down in scene one, and getting that information out to other jurisdictions is a little slower because we have to fight through the fog of what's going on. And again, I think that's something we need to think about. We need to think about the idea that if our suspect's not here right now and folks are telling us that this is the vehicle, this is the description, that we get out to our networks, whether it's dispatch talking to other dispatch centers or regional dispatch or fusion centers, whatever the case may be. You need to get that information out quickly, because there's some patrol officer in a neighboring county that's going to see a car acting weird and pull him over just thinking that he's got a traffic stop. But the reality is the suspect knows they're the ones that just did this terrible act 2 jurisdictions over, right. And that officer is going to be in a terrible shootout because they never had the information, right? So
you said something interesting, Adam. You brought up the role of the dispatch center. Isn't the dispatch center the most likely first opportunity to piece together, whoa, wait a minute, these things are connected, right? Is that, what do you think?
Absolutely. So I've had the opportunity to work around some dispatch centers and understand that they are really good about communicating with each other. And then there's the first line of defense is there's a supervisor that's kind of hearing more than one thing, and they're like, wait a minute, those things sound similar, and they start putting it together. But dispatch is very different across the country. We have some dispatch centers where there's one dispatcher on duty at night, and she's responsible for the police, fire, and EMS of that small community. And they might have a hotline to a neighboring community, they may not. And then you have regional dispatch centers that are responsible for 10, 12 jurisdictions all built together. Either of those methods work as long as there's a process for starting to say, hey, wait a minute, this sounds different. Let me make sure I get the information out there to the right folks, and making sure that the dots are connected. But one of the other tools in the toolbox that I've heard about having good success with is when you do get that initial active shooter event and you are dispatching your special response teams, that one sworn member of one of those teams actually goes to the dispatch center to help them start putting the dots together, to help recognize that, hey, these things are related and this sounds like this type of event, and let me help you start making some calls to get the right people to start spinning up a bigger response.
Juan, this is going to sound like a crazy tangent here, but it's kind of connected to this. I'm reminded of an incident that occurred in the fire service where there was a series of arson fires started in multifamily dwellings.
Yes.
There were 6 different fires started within less than 10 minutes of each other, all within less than 6 or 8 blocks of each other, all of them in occupied multifamily dwellings. And it was very taxing for the fire service, but ironically started from a shooting event.
Yes.
And the intent to cover up the shooting event. What kind of a challenge does that become when that's your incident?
Oh, very, very challenging. And boy, you remind me on that.
I know. It sticks out.
It sticks out because I'll just say I was there responding. But yeah, going back, it's very challenging because, again, that's where that area command comes into play, because you had multiple incidents happening all over the community itself. So it was very taxing for the resources, because you had, fire engines going here, fire engines, police going to here. It was taxing for everybody. So yeah, dispatch plays a vital role there in putting those things to that puzzle together. And very important when, we talked in a different podcast about that intelligence group. Make sure that intelligence group is embedded in the dispatch center to start, hey, with that supervisor, what information did you get here, and what information you got here, and that was one of the things. Going back to that incident, how they put that puzzle together very quickly because they embedded intelligence in dispatch, started working together, and they were communicating with everybody involved, saying this happened, and they put everything together. So yeah, but thanks for bringing back that.
You're welcome. So the moral of the story here is that even the simplest of active shooter events has got a minimum of 3 crime scenes. The place where the shooting was done, the vehicle or mode of transportation in which they arrived, and then their residence, minimum.
Right.
And depending on what happened or triggered the triggering event, there might be another family residence where there's other shooting victims, potentially fatalities. Have I left any out? We talked about the manhunt.
Right.
What have we left out? What have we missed?
Well, I mean, I want to circle back to the vehicle just a little bit, in the sense that oftentimes, I know for many times we've been trained, like wherever you're going to set up your command post, you need to make, check for secondary devices and things like that. That was a mantra that that's been in training for a while. But it's kind of incumbent on all responders and especially supervisors that when they get there, again, those first teams are going to be focused on the active stimulus that's happening right now. But somebody can take a pause and say, wait a minute, does anybody know which one of these vehicles is his? Because in a sense, it's potentially a secondary device, right? So if you've set up tactical triage and transport right next to the red Nissan that happens to be, the suspect vehicle, you got a problem there, right? So, and it reminds me again of a real world incident I had where, as that information came out, it was put out over the radio, and one of our civilian traffic that does just civilian traffic stuff, she said, hey, I have that vehicle right here, and it was 2 blocks away. So we had her on an outside perimeter thing, just blocking traffic. And next thing you know, we have a potential threat, right? A civilian that's got a vehicle 5 feet away from her. So, those are things that need to be uncovered pretty quickly. But like the rest of it that you talked about, the other one that I wouldn't say is left out, but it's something we've talked about before, is in addition to the 3 minimum scenes, if you have injured, your hospitals become places that have to be managed as well. They become ad hoc reunification centers. They become, sometimes the, people that are injured there, the hospital staff don't know the story, so they don't know whether they've got suspects or survivors or, so
all the clothes, any evidence pulled out of them, bullets, shrapnel, anything like that. Yeah.
So that becomes a whole nother branch of your incident response that has to be managed. And again, I think it's a best practice to very early on put a ranking supervisor just in charge of the hospitals to manage evidence, to manage, family issues and all of those sort of things.
Yeah. And, if you're listening, you're following along and you're thinking, man, that seems like an awful lot for the guy that's trying to manage the crisis site to have to manage all that too. Yeah. Welcome to incident command of active shooter events. It's not
plan for the worst, hope for the best.
It's not a simple task, but there are tools and mechanisms to make that a little bit better. Final thoughts on this topic. Kobe, you're up.
One thing to also think about as we didn't hit here is the digital forensics that are going to be out there. Phones, computers, how did they learn about this? What's that tell us? Were they live streaming it? If it's that kind of event, who were they talking to? If it wasn't that kind of event, was somebody telling them to go to this area to the nth degree of that? So that's something to look at too, is what's on them could lead to another crime scene, just like car keys lead you to a car, phone could lead you to their computers, to that whole digital footprint out there. But yeah, this is a great one because it could go into rabbit holes of all the evidence that's eventually going to be tied it together, and how fast can we scrub it and start getting that Reader's Digest. I don't know if any of the kids nowadays know the Reader's Digest. The Cliff Notes.
We're showing our age. The chat GPT summary.
GTP, whatever.
Final words.
The other thing also is the messaging. Make sure that we put that PIO out there, or that press briefing when things like this are happening, so that the community is aware of what's going on. Because that's one thing with this day and age with social media that we discussed in an earlier podcast, is that they get that information very quickly. So we want to make sure that if we're the incident commander or area commander, that we have that PIO saying, hey, I need a press briefing out as quickly as possible so they know exactly what's going on, and thinking about that reunification as well. I mean, if they're going to the hospital, start thinking ahead. Hey, we got to start putting these families together and explain what's going to be happening, kind of thing.
Adam, wrap it up for us.
Don't be afraid to delegate. If you're that incident commander who is getting overwhelmed with multiple sites, multiple jobs that need to get done, I'm a fan of giving away big chunks of your incident. Create that reunification branch director. Create put a SWAT commander in charge of the suspect's residence. Give the whole thing to them. This is their address. Go figure it out, and delegate big chunks of your incident to another ranking supervisor of some sort who can then take that part of the incident and report back to you what they've learned.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in to talk about this. If you have some questions, send them our way. We're always happy to engage and expand on the topics. Thank you to our producer, Carlo Torres. Like and subscribe to the podcast. Let your people know that you work with about it. And until next time, stay safe.